Since the NBA introduced the Defensive Player of the Year award in 1983, the league has followed a couple very specific trends when determining the winner of the award. For one, the voters highly favor the center position. Since the award became a thing, a center has won the race 26 out of 41 times. The other major trend is that the league highly favors great defensive players on top-tier teams. In the league's history, 30 out of the 41 winners have played on a top 4 seeded team. And what's even crazier is that each and every one of those 41 winners were on a playoff team. So as you can see, the typical formula for determining the winner is simple, which is essentially who's the best defensive center of the top seeded teams. But what if we said screw the formula and instead simply gave the award to the player who was honestly the best defensive player that season, regardless of what position he played and regardless of how his team finished? Well, if we did that, things would change up quite a bit. Today, the decade we're looking at is the 2010s, and let me know in a comment if you agree or disagree with these choices. In 2010, Dwight Howard won the DPOY, and he's keeping the award ahead of LeBron James and Josh Smith. This one wasn't much of a contest, as Howard led the league in many key categories, including blocks per game, defensive rebounds, defensive win shares, defensive plus-minus, and defensive rating. At 24 years old, he was at the peak of his athletic abilities, as nothing seemed out of his reach, considering how Dwight had one of the highest verticals in the game regardless of his size. It was thanks to his incredible rim protection that his Orlando Magic finished as a top 3 team defensively. On top of all of that, Howard played all 82 games that season, and none of the other finalists in the top 7 spots could make that claim. Again, there was some great defensive seasons from guys like Josh Smith, LeBron James, Gerald Wallace, and even Ron Artest in the second half of his career. But ultimately, no one had a campaign incredible enough to be a legitimate threat to Dwight in his physical prime. In 2011, Dwight Howard won his 3rd straight DPOY, and once again, he's keeping the award, ahead of Tony Allen and Kevin Garnett. Specifically, in the case of Allen, he didn't receive as much consideration as he should have got since his Grizzlies were not a top-seeded team. But with that being said, he was quite impressive, as he was regularly causing problems for some of the best wing scorers in the entire league. Beyond his stifling on-ball defense, he was also 5th in the league overall in steals per game. I was very close to giving this award to Allen for his amazing defensive skills that go beyond the stat sheet. But ultimately, I think Howard's case remains too strong. Dwight once again led the league in many crucial categories, like defensive rating, defensive rebounds, and defensive win shares. He was 4th overall in blocks per game at 2.4, and he also led all centers in steals per game with 1.4, which was actually 18th in the league overall. If the best ability is availability, then Dwight was once again dominating that category, as he played in 78 of the 82 regular season games, which was by far the most game of any of the top 6 finalists. Even when dismissing the built-in advantages for centers, I still believe Dwight was slightly the best defender in the league overall this season. In 2012, Tyson Chandler was awarded the DPOY, but on this list, he's losing the award to LeBron James. Several candidates had a solid case for the award. For example, Serge Ibaka led the NBA in blocks per game at 3.7, regardless of the fact that he only played 27 minutes per game. Kevin Garnett led the league in defensive rating while leading his Celtics to be the best defensive team in the league statistically. Of course, Tyson Chandler had an argument for being the best rim protector in the league that year, which is why he ended up winning the award. But for me, the best defender overall that season, regardless of position, was the athletically dominant LeBron James. At 27 years old, James was right along his peak in terms of speed, strength, and leaping ability, but he was also the defensive engine of that extremely elite Miami group, as the Heat finished as a top 4 team defensively. This was also the season where LeBron showed small glimpses of his defensive versatility by successfully guarding bigs in the post as good as the 7-foot Pau Gasol. He played in 62 of the 66 games in that lockout-shortened season, and in that time, he was all over the court, as he averaged a whopping 1.9 steals and 0.8 blocks. That steals average was the third most in the league overall, and the second highest of his career. He had the best defensive plus-minus in the entire league and had a better defensive rating than the top two finalists, which were Tyson Chandler and Serge Ibaka. To me, this season is one of the great examples of the natural advantages for rim-protecting centers, because when you look at what they accomplished relatively to their position, LeBron was clearly more deserving than Chandler. In 2013, Marc Gasol was named the Defensive Player of the Year, and he's keeping the award ahead of LeBron James. Now, this is certainly one of the most controversial awards in basketball history, and the reason for the controversy is because although Marc Gasol was selected as the Defensive Player of the Year, he simultaneously only finished on the NBA's second all-defense team. This makes some people think that LeBron was nefariously snubbed, because how can someone be the Defensive Player of the Year if they weren't even voted as the best defender at their position? Well, it's quite simple. Two different groups voted. Gasol was voted as the best defensive player by members of the media, while NBA coaches voted for him to be on the second all-defense team. Personally, in this specific instance, I agree with the members of the media. Marc was the defensive anchor of that Grizzlies team, and despite the Heat finishing with a much better record overall, it was the Grizzlies who had the better defensive team statistically, as they finished with the second best defense in the entire league compared to Miami, who was ranked 9th. I get it, that's a team stat, for sure. But Marc was the driving interior force of that defense. Even on an individual level, by nearly every advanced statistical metric, Gasol had a better defensive season than LeBron. He had more defensive win shares, he had a higher defensive rating, and he had the best defensive plus-minus in the entire league, on top of the fact that he played more games than LeBron. If you're simply looking at blocks and steals, then yeah, Gasol might not have an argument as good as LeBron or Serge Ibaka, but defense is a lot more than just that, and Marc proved that this season, with his tremendous defensive IQ, with his communication on D, and with his solid rim protection and contention. In 2014, Joakim Noah won his first and only DPOY, and he's keeping the award ahead of DeAndre Jordan and Roy Hibbert. Now once again, the voters made this selection as a recognition of the Bulls' top two defense, and I would argue that Tom Thibodeau deserved a ton of credit for that as well. With that being said, from a player's perspective, giving the majority of the credit to Noah was the correct decision. He was an absolute pest to opposing bigs that season, consistently giving them very little space to operate. On the year, he averaged 1.2 steals and 1.5 blocks, while being first overall in defensive win shares, first overall in defensive rating, and second overall in defensive plus-minus. When you look at the voting disparity, it wasn't even all that close, and I honestly feel the same way. I will say that this wasn't the most competitive season, as guys like Ibaka, Dwight Howard, and even Marc Gasol took significant steps backwards from the previous season. Regardless, the award is secure with Noah nonetheless. In 2015, Kawhi Leonard narrowly won his first DPOY, but on my list, he loses the award to Draymond Green. Yes, Kawhi Leonard had a great defensive season, but for myself personally, this seemed like one of the more obvious overturns in this series. For one, Kawhi didn't play very much. He participated in 64 games, which would disqualify him from winning an award by modern-day rules. And his 64 games is actually the second fewest in NBA history for a winner in a full-length season. Another interesting detail is that Kawhi didn't even have the most first-place votes, but that was actually Draymond by quite a bit. But because voters placed their votes with specific rankings, Kawhi was able to win based on the overall points. Draymond participated in 15 more regular season games. His team had the best defensive rating, and he had more defensive win shares than Kawhi. Draymond averaged 1.6 steals and 1.3 blocks, which is a very impressive number coming from a 6'6 player. And when you consider how he was the vocal defensive leader of that first-seeded Warriors team, he deserves even more credit. Again, we understand the kind of defender that Kawhi was in San Antonio, but defense is worth nothing if you're on the bench or sitting at home. So for this reason especially, Draymond Green was the more deserving player. In 2016, Kawhi Leonard once again defeated Draymond Green in a close race, but this time he's keeping the award. The Warriors had an NBA record 73-9 season, yet Kawhi Leonard and the San Antonio Spurs still had a better team defense statistically. They had a great defensive team overall, but without question, the majority of that credit belonged to the game's top wing defender, Kawhi Leonard. He had more win shares, a better defensive rating, and a better defensive plus-minus than Draymond. On the year, Kawhi averaged 1.8 steals and a career-high 1 block, and a much more worthy 72 games played. Although Draymond has his own case, Golden State's success that season had more to do with their incredibly prolific and efficient offense that was breaking league records, as the Warriors finished with only the 5th best defensive rating despite their 73-9 record. At the end of the day, Kawhi was the smart choice in this race. In 2017, Draymond Green was named the Defensive Player of the Year, and he's keeping the award ahead of Rudy Gobert and Kawhi Leonard. After the addition of Kevin Durant, the Warriors dominated basketball like it was clockwork, and I think that historic team effort overshadowed what may have been Draymond's best season from a defensive standpoint. With his offensive role reduced, he was enabled to focus even more of his energy and intensity on the defensive end. He averaged 2 steals per game, which led the entire league that season, and he averaged 1.4 blocks per game. Both of those averages were career highs. Along with that, he had the best defensive plus-minus in the entire league, and frankly, it wasn't all that close. Rudy Gobert was the runner-up, and rightfully so, as it was a typical season for him of elite rim protection, but there was simply no one as deserving as Green this season. In 2018, Rudy Gobert won his first of many DPOYs, but on this list, he loses the award to the former Pelicans star Anthony Davis. I gotta be real with you guys, and I'm not gonna mince words. This DPOY selection was the most egregious I have ever seen, period, point blank. It's not because Gobert isn't an all-time great rim protector, because he certainly is, but it's because he only played a measly 56 games out of the 82-game regular season. The only season where a DPOY played less was Alonzo Mourning in 1999, and it was literally impossible for him to play as many games as Gobert because it was a lockout-shortened 50-game season. The guy they voted as the runner-up was Joel Embiid, who only played 63 games that season. Both of those players would be ineligible by modern-day rules. For me, Anthony Davis was the most deserving candidate. He played 75 games that season, which is a rare miracle by his standards. Davis led the league in defensive win shares and blocks per game at 2.6, and he was 15th in the entire league in steals per game at 1.5. Sure, Gobert had a better defensive rating than AD, and you could even say that he was the better rim protector if you want. But did his value make up for the 20-game gap between him and Davis? Personally, I have no idea what the voters were thinking this season. In 2019, Rudy Gobert won his second straight DPOY, and this time he's keeping the award ahead of Giannis. This season, Gobert led his Jazz to have the second best defense in the entire league, and availability was no issue, as he played in 81 of the 82 regular season games. Throughout that time, his gravitational effect on opposing teams could be clearly seen, as he averaged 2.3 blocks per game and 0.8 steals, while leading the entire league in defensive win shares. Giannis and Embiid had their own strong showings, but with significantly less games played. Ultimately, when a young Gobert is out there and healthy for the majority of the season, he's darn near impossible to beat. So what do you guys think? Do you agree with the list? Is there anyone who should have won the award instead? I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comment section below. Thanks for watching as always, make sure to like and subscribe for more basketball content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.